Okay, welcome back to Mike's Gun World. Today we're going to be taking apart a Colt Trooper Mark III from 1977. I just picked this up. It's a very nice firearm. I don't think it's been fired more than about 50 times. There are no marks on it. It's very clean. It actually came in its original packaging. That's a little bit beat up, but I did get all the original packaging. Unfortunately, I did not get the original manual with it, but it is nice to have the original box. Now, the Colt Trooper Mark III, often referred to as the poor man's Python. It is very similar to a Colt Python. It looks and feels like it. It doesn't have the top rail like a Python, and mechanically it's a little bit different too. But one of the reasons I want to work on this Colt Trooper today is in double action. I kind of feel like, well, let's clear it first. Let's be safe, we're empty. I kind of feel like it's a little bit heavy in double action. So on my Wheeler gauge, I pulled the trigger 10 times and I averaged 9.45 ounces. A little heavy in my opinion. I think we can lighten it up. We put a new mainspring in, we put a new trigger spring in, we should be able to lighten it up. Now Wolf Springs does make a spring kit for the Colt Trooper. And when I got them, I realized the one spring is an 11-pound pull, okay, and then the other one's a 13-pound pull. Now I don't know what the original spring tension is on the Colt, but I don't know. I'm pulling at 9.9 pounds, 4.5 ounces. This says 11. We're going to just take it apart and see what happens. If nothing else, I'll show you how to take a Colt Trooper Mark III down, disassemble, and then reassemble it. We'll put the new springs in and we'll give it a shot. Hey, before we get going, if you're liking the content, you're liking my channel, please hit like and subscribe. You hit subscribe, you'll get notifications when I drop new videos. All your support is really, really, really appreciated. All right, let's get to, first of all, explaining some of the mechanics of this and then how to disassemble it. And let's see if we can lighten that double action a little bit. Okay, so I got some new camera angles I want to try out. See if these work a little bit better. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the function of the what's called the transfer bar or the safety bar. In modern revolvers, most modern, if not all modern revolvers have what's called a transfer bar. And as you pull the hammer back, you can see this bar coming up right here. So when the hammer is down, it's never physically resting on the firing pin, okay? It needs to hit the transfer bar, which in turn transfers the energy to the firing pin and fires, hits the primer and fires your round. That safety feature is in case you drop the firearm, it doesn't accidentally discharge. So if we open up the cylinder, you can see in here that the firing pin, the hammer is not laying on the firing pin. I think we can see that, right? Okay. If you pull the hammer back and the transfer bar comes up, when you pull the trigger, the transfer bar stays there and the energy from the hammer actually hits the firing pin and the firing pin is sticking out until you release the trigger. And then the firing pin retreats back into the frame. So those are some of the components inside here that we're going to have to take out in order to get to the two springs we want to work on today. So it's a fairly easy takedown. First thing we're going to do is take the grips off. It's one screw, not a real big deal. They come apart pretty easy. And then our main spring is sitting right here. Next thing we want to do is we want to actually get the cylinder out. It has two screws, one on each side. The one on the left side of the frame is just a standalone screw by itself. On the right side of the frame, you want to be careful because this one's under a little bit of pressure. There is a spring in there. There's a spring and a little plunger in there. You want to get that out and then turn the gun over and get that little plunger out. So you're going to have a spring, a plunger, and then the screw seats that whole thing down. Okay, so let's get that over onto a magnet so we don't lose it. And at this point, we can take the cylinder out. So we want to hit the cylinder release, pull this forward, and then you should be able to just slide the crane right out and your cylinder's out. That's it. It's that simple. I'm not going to take the cylinder apart. There's no reason to. It has nothing to do with the trigger job that we're doing today. The next thing we want to do, there's one screw that holds the side plate on here, and it's back here. It actually sits below the grips, and it goes all the way through. We're going to want to remove that screw. And get the side plate off. Now, sometimes you sort of have to work on the side plate a little bit to break it loose. I'm just using a punch to gently lift it up. As you're doing that, you're going to have to pull the cylinder release back in order to get the plate off. It's under spring tension, so you want to be careful because it is going to come off. As you get the plate off, there's a little tang right here at the top that sits in the frame right here. But the cylinder release will actually, it's under spring pressure right there. It'll just slide forward. So now we've got our side plate off. Let's talk about some of the components in here. So one of the things that I was talking about was a transfer bar, and that sits right here in front of the hammer. And it does have a spring on it. This piece right here is known as the hand, and typically the hand has a combined hand and hand spring. And what the hand does is it pushes on the cogs, on the back of the cylinder and actually rotates the cylinder. So as you pull the trigger, the spring's actually off, but as you pull the trigger or pull the hammer back, you'll see the hand pushes up where the cogs would be and rotates the cylinder. And then you can also see the transfer bar going up. But again, the spring is already off, so it's not going up exactly correctly the way it should. But we can take the hand out of here, and then we can take the transfer bar out, and the transfer bar is what is actually holding the handspring on this model revolver. So that's your transfer bar with the handspring. At this point, we are ready to actually get the mainspring out back here. I like to use a paper clip. If you pull the hammer back, typically there is a hole in the spring stud where you can put a paper clip and keep tension on that spring. So when you release the hammer, it takes all the pressure off, and there's your stud and hammer spring. That's out. The next thing you want to do is just lift your hammer right off the stud. There's a hammer stud right there. Lift the hammer right out. So our trigger spring sits along the lower frame right here. What we're going to have to do is take these two pins out with a pair of pliers, and then we're going to take the trigger off, and we're going to be able to get that trigger spring out of there. Pretty simple. Except I didn't bring my needle nose. I have to go get them. Okay, so the purpose of these two pins right here are they actually hold the trigger spring in place between the two. So those two are what's activating the tension of the spring. So they're very easy to pull out. Take a pair of needle nose. They should slide right out. And it's important to note that there's on the right side of the gun, there's sort of a little gap in there. There's like a little channel cut in that pin. So you want to make sure that little channel slides, when it slides back in, it slides to the right side of the frame. And that's really how the trigger pin is held in place. So we'll pull this other one out. It's exactly the same as the first one. Has the same little channel. This one, there we go. That was a little tougher because the spring was on it. Same little channel. Again, goes to the right side of the frame. Now we can just lift the trigger out off the trigger stud. It comes out, and there is our trigger spring, which is under pressure. So you're going to have to be careful as you're pulling this off the trigger spring stud. Okay, so to take the spring out, it's under pressure, but not a lot of pressure. You can use needle nose again. Grab the coils gently and pull your spring up and unseat the rear of the spring. It really, honestly, it just pops out that quickly. And there is your trigger spring. So at this point, we're ready to put the Wolf parts back in. So here's a reduced power trigger spring, and then, like I said, it's 11 pounds earlier. It's 11.5 pounds. The hammer spring. We have to get the hammer spring off the stud too. So let's do that next. Okay, so I have a little smithing block I like to use here when I'm drifting pins out, but we can use it for the hammer stud itself. Put it in there. It gives us a little bit of leverage to work because we're under pretty heavy pressure right now. We do have the spring collapsed and pinned in place by my trusty paper clip. So again, we can use, maybe not the greatest idea, but we can use the needle nose. We're going to want to put enough pressure on the mainspring to actually get the paper clip out of the notch and very carefully allow it to come off the stud. So there's your mainspring seat. And then there is the original mainspring. So right now we're ready to start putting the new parts back in. If we compare the new and the old, I would say the new mainspring is exactly the same size. Thickness is a little bit less. So let's see what it does. We're going to take the original, put it over here. Let's open up the package for our 11.5 pound spring. I'll be able to tell right away when we're trying to put the seat back on whether or not this spring is lighter or heavier. So drop it on the stud. Get it compressed as much as you can. Get the seat in place. Look for, there's a lot less pressure here. I want to look for the hole in the stud, and I want to get my paper clip, which I lost. There it is. It's a lot less pressure right now, I'll tell you that. And we're going to get our paper clip back through the little hole in the stud, and there we go. That's actually ready to go back in the firearm. So next we're going to want to get out our trigger spring reduced power by Wolf. And you want to make sure that it's seated with your coils all the way up and the top part of your spring to the rear of the frame. So let's get that on the spring stud. And then we're going to use a punch to actually compress the spring a little bit and get it inside the frame. This might take us a couple of tries. The spring, for some reason, does seem a little bit heavier. Nope. Yeah, I got part of it in. We'll have to just keep working very... you got to take your time and just get that spring moved enough to seat it in place. Nope, still didn't get it. Okay, so I ended up doing it off camera because it took me a while. All I can tell you is it's a little bit of trial and error. I did end up using the needle nose and a punch, but as you can see, it has to sit completely on the frame and on the stud in order for it to be installed correctly. So it does take a little bit. It's not that hard. Honestly, it took me about 5 minutes off camera. If you're going to do this, it's something, quite honestly, it's a little bit of trial and error. But you can get it done. All right, so as we're putting the trigger back on, I did mention the little channel in the side of the pin, and that is really where the trigger spring kind of seats, right in that channel. So it is important that you go left to right and that channel sits on the right side of the frame. Put the trigger on the trigger stud, and then we're going to put the lower pin in, and we're going to have to use a punch to move the spring up and seat it correctly in the channel. Nope. I got it below the stud. Okay, that should be in place. Yes, that is properly in place. It's moving the spring correctly. Let's put our upper pin back in place. Okay. Perfect. Now, let's get our hammer back in place. Our hammer goes on the hammer stud. We want to be careful here to hold the trigger down so that spring doesn't slip off. We want to get the hammer down below the sear right here. The trigger needs to be up above this right here, the sear. Okay, so now our hammer is in place. Everything's working good. Let's get our hammer spring, stud, and hammer seat back in place. There's a little notch under the hammer right here, where the top of the stud sits. Get it seated, and then we're going to pull the hammer back. We're going to release pressure on the spring, and we're going to get our paper clip out of here. Or we're going to try to get our paper clip out of here. There we go. Paper clip comes out. Release tension. We're good. Next thing that has to go in place is the hand. And the hand goes on, there's the two studs that we took out that actually hold, or the two pins that we took out that hold the trigger spring, actually hold the hand and the transfer bar and hand spring. The hand goes on the upper pin. Oops, I think I'm magnetized here. And on the frame right here, there's a little stud right here. The hand has to go to the back of that stud. Just drop it right in place like that. Sits perfectly. Then we're going to put our transfer bar back in place. And it's important that the hand spring puts tension on the hand as we get this seated in place. and it's going to come all the way forward and drop right in front of the hammer. And now you can see the hand spring, and the transfer bar all in place. We're almost 100% done at this point. The next thing we want to do is get our side plate back on. And remember, our cylinder release is under pressure, so it's got some grooves here. It's slotted. The slide release slips right into there, and there's a little notch here that goes into the upper part of the frame. So we want to make sure that notch is in place and being seated correctly. And then we can just drop our side plate right onto the frame. And might need just a little tap. Yep, that's all needed. There we go. So let's put our side plate screw back in place. And that will actually lock the plate all the way down. Okay, now we want to get our crane back in place and cylinder, slide that back in place. Make sure you're pulling your slide release back. Crane should slide in. Your cylinder slides right into place. Last thing we have to do is put our cylinder screws back in. So remember, on the right side of the frame, there is a plunger that goes in first. And then there's a little spring that sits on top of that, like that, and then we'll put our screw back in place. Get it hand started, and then get your screwdriver on there and put it all the way back in. And then on the left side of the frame is our last screw. And that's actually going to finish snugging up the plate, the side plate, all the way so it's seated nice and flush all the way around. So the last thing to do is put the grips on, but from a function standpoint, everything's working good. Double action, well, it does seem a little bit lighter. It does seem just a little bit lighter. Let's get the grips on and get the wheeler on it and see if we did lighten these up at all. One thing we might have wanted to do when we were in there was polish up the sear a little bit. Get any burrs off of it. Let's see what the wheeler says. If I have to do that, I'll get back in there and polish up the sear just a little bit. But let's get the wheeler on it and see what it has to say. Double action. And we're pulling 8 and 3.1 ounces. 9. Yeah, we didn't really do much, I'll be honest with you. We were 9 pounds, 4.5 ounces. We're averaging 8 pounds. And we're still averaging around 8. A little over 8 pounds. That was 9, 5, 8, 7. No, we did lighten it up. Yep. I got 5 pounds, 11 ounces there. Let's try this again. Oh yeah, we did. We lightened this up a lot. I was pulling in the wrong spot. Oh yeah, we took a lot out of it. Let's go all the way to 10. 5, 6, 7. Okay, yeah, we took a lot out of it. We started at 9 pounds, 4.5 ounces, average for 10 pulls. I brought double action down to 5 pounds, 2.7 ounces. Not sure if you can see that. Try to get it on camera. So we definitely lightened it up, and I'll tell you, it does feel a lot better. I wonder what it's like in single action. Oh. That's nearly a hair trigger in single action. So anyway, that is your trigger job on a Colt Trooper Mark III. Okay, so I hope you found the video informative. I think it's a pretty cool firearm. I haven't even shot it yet. I wanted to lighten the trigger, and then I want to get out on the range and shoot it. But what is cool is we took double action pull down by almost 50%, 9 pounds 4.5 ounces to 5 pounds 2.5 ounces, and it is much smoother. Hey, again, if you're liking what you see, please hit like, subscribe, leave some comments down below. I don't mind the criticism. I don't do everything right. Maybe there's a better idea, especially putting the trigger spring back in there. I struggled with that a little bit. But I hope you found it informative. We will see you soon.